Begin. Yes, good morning. Today's topic is carrying weapons on Shabbos and in Shul. The source sheet's over there. I'll begin by telling you that I have a friend who's a rabbi. Yes, you can be friends with rabbis. Little known fact. And he's a rabbi in a southern state. And he recently told me that everyone in his shul are carrying weapons. And he said even the sheriff of the community is a member of his shul and sometimes has a little bit too much to drink and is carrying a weapon. So he has a few thoughts before his drasha, what he's going to say by the time Kiddush Club ends and people are back in shul and he's speaking and they have weapons. It gives a little bit of a pachad before he gives musar. He made a little bit of a joke, but the truth is that it seems to be that a lot of people are carrying weapons nowadays, unfortunately, because of anti-Semitic incidents or fear of anti-Semitic incidents. And we're speaking in Canada. Good morning. I know that many people pointed out it's not really so lemaisa to be carrying a weapon. I know that it may be illegal, but we're just going to learn not the legal piece of it. We're also not going to even learn about whether it's advisable, because you'd have to ask, your local law enforcement whether it's advisable that a lot of people be carrying different weapons who are not trained. But we're going to talk about the halachos. The halachos as a sugya, as we generally try to show how contemporary issues are dealt with in the poskim and in a fascinating way. So let's begin with a few Mar Makomos on anti-Semitism, one of the oldest, or if possibly the oldest hatred of all time. So we know in Parshas Vayishlach, you need a pod? Parshas Vayishlach, we know that there's a well-known Rashi, Parshas Vayishlach, source number 1, tells us in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, halacha hi biyadua she'esav sona es liYakov, that it's a halacha that Esav hates Yaakov. So many ask the question, what halacha is that? It's not a halacha. Halacha is a law. What does this mean? It's a halacha, biyadua. So Moshe Feinstein writes in Choshe Mishpat, Chela Gimel, Siman Ayin Zayin, he says, K'moshe halacha lo mishtanis, just like halacha doesn't change, kach sinas Esav Yaakov lo mishtanis. Anti-Semitism doesn't change. And he says, even even if they're treating us well, the hatred is there at its core. And unfortunately, I think we've been exposed to a new level. In my own lifetime, have not seen this type of anti-Semitism as we've seen.
52 years of it.
Right, all 33 years. No, but I think anyone in this room, has anyone in this room,
from last week's year, huh? So one thing you remember from last week's year.
has anyone in this room experienced as much anti-Israel, anti-Semitism? Okay, thank you. So, either way, you could say whatever you want. You don't have to be quiet, Rabbi Black. This is a chabura. It's a chabura. Sorry. A lot of what they do is just for the recording. There's a really important rabbinic figure that many people don't know about, and it's probably we don't know about him because unfortunately his life was cut too short. But his name is Rabbi Menachem Zemba. Rabbi Menachem Zemba, Hashem Yikom Damo, was one of the greatest Gaonim of his generation.
The Rav of the Warsaw Ghetto.
The Rav in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Rav in Warsaw. And he actually was gunned down by the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto. There's a picture of him over here. Take a look. And there's some things that we salvaged from him. And this is in Chidushi HaGarmaz, which is Hagon Rav Menachem Zemba, Simin Mem Ches. And it's fascinating. He talks about this idea of Esav son of Yaakov. And what does he say? He says, if you notice, who does Rashi quote? The Medrash is quoting Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, elsewhere in Shas, Rabbi Shimon is the one who's darshin on time of the Kra. Right? there's a question: can we learn out the reasons behind the mitzvos, the reasons behind what the Torah says? Are we darshin in time of dekra? So Rabbi Shimon says we do hold darshin on time of dekra, although we have others that disagree. There's a whole discussion about this, but Rabbi Shimon, the one who says we're darshin on time of dekra, he says, this is Rabbi Nachum Zemba's parish, he's the one who says it's a halacha biyadua, halacha psuka, lo kol tam v'nimuk. There's no reason for it. They hate us because we're capitalists. They hate us because we're socialists. They hate us because we're wealthy. They hate us because we're parasites. They hate us. It's not logical, and even the Reb Shimon who holds we can learn the time of Dekra, derive the reasoning behind the Torah. He says here we cannot understand what the reasons behind anti-Semitism are. People say if we're successful, if we assimilate, if we become just like them, then they won't hate us. That doesn't work either. And there's so many different iterations of attempts to understand and to defeat anti-Semitism. Rabbi Nachum Zemba, Hashem Yikam Demo, who was at the brunt, took the actual, literally, Moser Nefesh, the full sacrifice for being a Jew. He writes this in his work, which I think is just important to start off with. So, I think that it's important to think about self-defense. It's important to weigh all these measures. As I mentioned, we're not going to really discuss halamaisa if you should be having a weapon, but we're going to talk about the sugya and the halacha. So, yeah.
Quick thought.
It's Chaim Levy.
The Maggid.
Name for the record.
In case it's a bad question, I think it's still me.
No, seriously, could be for another year, but
Yeah.
as we all know, Hashem runs the world.
Yeah.
Everything that happens is the doing of Hashem. So what we're experiencing throughout our lifetime, anti-Semitism, Amalek, maybe it's put there for a reason.
Not only maybe, it definitely
I'm
is.
just saying,
Yeah.
right? I'm saying, right?
So the question is, do you have to defend yourself, or do you have to just accept?
Or we have to understand why it's happening, what's going on. We're all very upset. We should be all very upset because it's disrupting our life. But we have to understand.
So you're saying differently.
I'm suggesting.
You're suggesting differently than Rabbi Nachum Zemba that maybe we should understand the logic behind anti-Semitism in order to better combat it, or better understand what Hashem's message is for us.
Maybe, yeah.
I hear you. I was just thought we would introduce the topic by a few points in Hashkafa, but I hear that's really probably a whole other type of shir.
Sure.
But we're going to focus mostly on just the poskim and the issues that come up with both carrying a weapon on Shabbos and carrying a weapon in a shul. But it's a good point in terms of Hashkacha and anti-Semitism, and what does it mean? There's no reason. Like, obviously there must be something that Hashem's... I hear what you're saying. There's a reason for everything, but I thought it meant, I guess you could say there's some illogical hatred out there in the world. I think we could all understand there is some, right?
If people don't think it was...
Maybe there's a reason for that illogical hatred
People
that
don't think
Hashem
it's a
has.
depression. Rabbi Glenn Black told me to say it.
Okay, this recording is going in the garbage.
My first.
Yeah, you really don't want it to come back. Yeah. Okay. So I thought.
Before we even get, are you going to talk about? Is the problem that it's muksa? Like what?
Yeah, we're gonna see. We're gonna see. I'm trying to get there. Yeah, 100%. So I'm gonna skip over these few sources for now, just because we're a little bit getting distracted. But so let's go straight to the halachic problems that we would face by carrying a weapon on Shabbos. So carrying a weapon in a place where there's no Erev, which is oftentimes when you have, let's say, especially in Israel, you have in the Shtachim, or you have other kibbutzim, you have different areas where you'll have other places close by where there's no Erev. So, are you allowed to carry a weapon in a place where there's no Erev? So, the Gemara in Shabbos, on Daf Samachim, we'll take a look at source number 6. The Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Lo yetze ha'ish, lo b'sayev, lo b'keshes, lo b'tris. Just like a woman's not with the Mishnah previously talked about what women can carry out with, but a man is not allowed to go out with a sword. He's not allowed to go out with a bow. He's not allowed to go out with a shield. v'lo baromach, which aba'ala v'lo baromach, and not with a spear. V'im yatsa, if he went out on Shabbos without, in other words, he carried without, by accident, without an erev chayav chatas, which we know is code word for iser daraisa. Rabbi Lazar Omer, that's a Tanakam. Rabbi Lazar Omer, tachshitin hein lo. That's not a problem because it's a tachshit. Now, there are certain things on Shabbos that you're allowed to carry, even when there's no erev, and that is your clothing, jewelry. So he's saying it's not a problem to go out disagreeing with the Chachamim because it's considered a tachshit, it's considered an ornament. The Chachamim respond and they say, no, that's not true. Ein on elo l'gnai. It's not considered a tachshit, it's considered reprehensible. Shenemar v'kitisu v'charvosam li'itim v'chaninososehem l'mamzmei ros, that in the future times they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into hooks. V'lo yisa goy el goy, and no nation will rise up against the other. Cherev, a sword. V'lo yimudu l'od melchama, they will never learn any more war again. It's a famous psukim in Yeshayahu, and therefore it's not considered a tachshit, it's considered a gnai. How do we paskin halacha l'maisa? Is it considered a tachshit, which would mean you're allowed to go out without an erev by holding a weapon? So the Shulchan Aruch writes, it's really the Ramah is gloss in the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim Shin Aleph Siv Zayin. The Ramah writes, Lo yeteish b'sai v'lo b'keshes v'lo b'tris v'lo ba'olav v'lo b'romach v'lo b'kilim she'enim tachshit im yatsa chayav chatas. The Shulchan Aruch paskins, or the Ramah paskins, that like the Chachamim, that it's a gnai, it's not a tachshit, seemingly in open and shut case, that it would be usher to wear or to carry a weapon on Shabbos when there's no erev. However, the poskim can discuss a very interesting Aruch HaShulchan. Everyone's discussing this Aruch HaShulchan. Very interesting. Rabbi Yashiv talks about it. The Klozenberger Rebbe talks about it. The Aruch HaShulchan says this is only true for a regular person. However, when we're dealing with a soldier, part of their uniform is a weapon, and therefore, for a soldier, there's a different halacha. Take a look at Aruch HaShulchan, Simin, Shin, Aleph, Sif, Nun, Aleph, source number 8. He says, Hatam mipnei shadvarim elu einam tachshitim be'etzem el l'balei milchama hareihim kibigodav. That this is only true for regular people, but for a balei milchama, for people at war, for soldiers, that's considered like his begadim. Avu b'stam b'nei adam hareihim masa. But a regular person, it's considered a masa, a burden, something that you're carrying, which would be usher on Shabbos. So there are poskim that say, based on this Aruch HaShulchan, we allow someone who's in the army to carry a weapon, even in an area where there's no erev. However,
what about the person who's not in the army? But what about in a situation where you're carrying it for life and death? For safety?
So pikuach nefesh, we should say right off the bat. Thank you for reminding me. We're not talking about pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh is docha Shabbos. So therefore, anything that's pikuach nefesh, someone's life is in danger, imminent danger, is not even our discussion, right? You could do anything. You could get in a car, whatever you need to do. We're talking about non-pikuach nefesh situations. It's a hard thing to really hone and weigh each case-by-case situation. Is this considered pikuach nefesh? Is it not? What's the level of sakana? That I don't know. But we're going to say we're not at the threshold. We haven't reached the threshold of someone is attacking us, or we're in an area where it's under, threat. We're not even dealing with that. We're talking about a standard situation. You could argue that in certain areas, if you're living out, in an embattled area, you could argue that maybe it is considered sakanas nefashos. I'm not dealing with active war zone, right?
But there is a limit, right? Let's say in your case with the community down in the south, Florida, whatever you say, 30 people dive in a shul, 30 people come on Shabbos with guns.
Yeah, no,
You're saying every single person,
like down south.
What I'm saying is that really is pikuach nefesh?
right? So I'm not defending that practice.
You have 3 guards outside. Does anybody need a gun inside?
Right.
Like, how do you understand?
So I don't know what their heter is. It could be that there's different other heterim, but it's not going to. The Aruch HaShulchan heter is not going to apply. And anyways, that's probably a discussion of a case where they have an erev, which we didn't get to yet. But that will be a question of muktzah, which we didn't get to yet.
Oh, but pikuach nefesh, the Shabbos, you're saying. So I'm saying.
I didn't say that. That's what maybe that would be a scenario that we're not discussing. That you could argue, if you could justifiably argue that it's a pikuach nefesh situation, then everything's off. All bets are off.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
There's no question of erev of the hotzah, or if somebody's in a suffix even pikuach nefesh, then you have to violate Shabbos.
That's my. No, but there's no. That's what I'm saying. There's no red line where some people should have, some people wouldn't have.
Well,
you're on call this Shabbos. You're not on call this Shabbos.
You're saying even within that there could be different degrees. I understand, right? I understand, right? I understand what you're saying. So you'd have to ask experts.
Not everybody drives around.
You'd have to ask.
If you get a call on Salah, 2 people go, not 50 people.
You'd have to ask the experts, the security experts, what is considered advisable in a scenario where you are in a emergency situation. Is it advisable for 30 people to have weapons?
That's what I'm asking.
I imagine not, but that would be a question for the experts, and then depending on what the experts would say, that halacha would follow that. But even the Aruch HaShulchan is not accepted by many of the poskim. Rav Yashiv discusses it. He goes back and forth. But at the end of the day, Rav Yashiv, you want to take a look in Kovitz Chuvis Chelek Gimel Simin Nun Aleph. Rav Yashiv writes that L'maisa we should be machmir, even for those who are in the army. He says one should not rely on this Aruch HaShulchan. He says if you take a look at the bolded, Aruch HaShulchan is tamua, and you go further down. He says based on the Yerushalmi, which I'm not going to get into all the back and forth just for time's sake, but he says based on the Yerushalmi that the reason why you're taking the weapon out to use it is in order to use it. Why you're carrying it is in order to use it, and using that would be considered a problem of a chiyuv chatas, and therefore he would say that's not considered a takshit. A takshit is something that's an ornament. It's not something to fire a weapon. A weapon is to be used. It's not considered a takshit. And that's based on Yerushalmi. So L'maisa, he says, based on the Shulchan Aruch and other sources, if something's a takshit and has a shimush, has a usage and it's an ornament, but the usage is the main thing, we look at it as a masa, as something that you're not allowed to carry and be chayiv in an area without an erev. And this is also quoted in the Orcha Shabbos, Chelek Gimel, Perek Chaf Ches, Os Kuf Pei Ches, where he quotes from Rav Yashiv that we shouldn't rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. The Klosenberger Rebbe as well, in Divrei Yitziv, Chelek Orchaim Simin Kuf Mem Ches, source number 11. If you take a look, he quotes from the Magen Avram that even though if we even want to say it's a takshit, but that was just saying you're not chayav chatas, but maybe it's aser midirabanan, which we're going to get to a little bit later about muktzah. And then he says, it sounds though very good. The Aruch HaShulchan, he likes it. He goes back and forth. Again, at the end of the day, he says that the Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, Shamati me'ar Rabbanim be'Eretz HaKodesh, Asru b'zeh. The Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael said it's Asr. Kivan shehir be'pa'amim mitatlim hakli zayin biyad. Many times they're going to be handling the weapon with their hands. Ugzera krova ikka gam kishemalbush bo shem yitlu biyadu. It's like we should make a gzera, some sort of fence to prevent people from just handling it and very easily coming to carry it, and in that case it would be problematic to rely on any of the leniencies. So l'maisa, even in an area where you have no erev, even though we had the Aruch HaShulchan heter for a soldier, it seems like many of the poskim are very hesitant to rely on such a heter. Do you need to go? Okay. So let's deal with an area where there is an erev. Most Jewish communities where they have an erev, hopefully, even though some people don't hold to the erev.
Can you summarize what you just said? But they don't hold
A
like
soldier, according to this, Aruch HaShulchan,
no Arab situation.
the Aruch HaShulchan is not to be relied upon in an area where there's no Erev, not Sakanas Tefasha situation. You should not be, even a soldier should not be carrying a weapon. That's what
But a soldier is
Even
always
Eretz
considered in a sakana situation. No, that's why he's a soldier.
well, there are people who are off duty. Let's say you have an off-duty soldier. I was often.
No, that's not the same thing. It's a soldier is a soldier. No, an off-duty soldier.
If you're
is just
fighting
guy
a
with
war,
gun
that's a different story. If you're a soldier in an army,
in uniform.
in a uniform,
So
so
that's-
Aruch HaShulchan is trying to say it on Shabbos. Even if let's say you're not in active duty, but let's say you're wearing a uniform, I don't
No,
know,
there's no such thing.
then you would be mutter to wear your weapon. But the post group say you can't rely on this Aruch HaShulchan.
Right.
So that's
Sorry.
That's what
So
the-
what are you saying? You're saying if someone is in uniform, he's automatically
A
on
person
duty?
who is
Or
on
says
duty,
you should
in
be careful.
uniform with his
should.
whatever he's got on his Uzi,
Yeah.
they're saying that on Shabbos,
outside of an Erev. You
outside of an Eruv,
yes.
he should not
should
be
not
allowed
wear
to
carry your
his gun.
weapon.
And he's on duty.
Yeah, but in Eretz
I-
Yisrael, you could apply.
I'm not-
the whole thing of Pikuach Nefesh.
I'm not saying
Right.
that
The only
the
soldier is
They have to
considered
carry
at
it.
risk
Israel, you
immediately
have to
wearing a
carry it.
uniform.
They have to
Yeah,
carry
I'm
it.
saying. But I'm saying in Eretz Yisrael, you probably could apply the.
okay, some want to say, okay, you're going to get court-martialed if you don't wear your weapon. Let's say if you're in the American army, I don't know. Let's say you're on an army base on Shabbos. You're not in a sakana. What sakana are you in? You're in an army base. Okay, preventative measures need to be put into place, right? There's no war right now. Let's say it's a peacetime. I don't know. I'm not talking
Depends
about
what the rules
this
are.
moment
I mean,
is.
if the rule is you're
I'm telling you what the poskim say. The poskim say if you're on an army base in Israel, assuming we're talking about, or you're on an army base in America, maybe in Canada, wherever you want to, say that's not an active combat. Okay, you're in your army space. I imagine you're wearing your gear on Shabbos. Okay, let's say you're a chaplain in an army and you trained to have a gun, but you don't usually use it. Whatever it is, the Aruch HaShulchan would say, no problem. It's part of your uniform. But we're saying you can't rely on that Aruch HaShulchan because it has a usage, etc. Now you're right. If it's a scenario of Pikuach Nefesh, we're not dealing with that. So I guess I'm trying to just parse apart the issue. Imagine it's not dangerous. You're wearing a uniform. It's on Shabbos. No Erev. You're in the middle of Mississippi. I don't know where the army bases are in the States, but you're training and it's Shabbos and you're in the army. You should not rely on this Aruch HaShulchan. That's what we're saying. So let's say you have an Erev. You have an Erev, Baruch Hashem, and now we're dealing with a different problem that comes up, which is a muktzah problem. I heard from a reliable source who called me a few weeks ago about an article that I wrote, and he told me from Rav Hutner. I asked him if he ever heard from Rav Hutner anything about Rav Kook, because Rav Hutner was one of his, Rav Kook was one of his, maybe possibly even his Rebbe Movak, according to this person who knew Rav Hutner. But either way, he was very close with Rav Kook, even if he wasn't. You had other Rabbanim, but either way, Rav Hutner, I asked this fellow, did you hear anything from Rav Hutner about Rav Kook? And he said, no. But I do remember one time he came back from Eretz Yisrael and he was very upset with Rav Gorin, because Rav Gorin said that the soldiers in the army are allowed to carry weapons because of kibush haaretz, because of conquering the land. And Rav Hutner said it has nothing to do with kibush haaretz, it's a pikuach nefesh issue. It's not a kibush haaretz. Either way, that's just an anecdotal story. But now we're going to move on to a situation when you have an Erev, but there's another problem, another hurdle we have to go through, which is the question of muktzah. So you could look at this issue in really two different ways. You could say that we look at a weapon you carry a weapon in order to fire it. Firing it is havara, is making a fire. That's a malacha on Shabbos, and therefore a weapon would be considered a kli shemalachto leisser. It would be muktzah. However, you could also look at it as, when am I firing my weapon? In a scenario where it's pikuach nefesh, so that's mutter. So maybe it's a kli shemalachto leheter, because of whatever I'm going to use it, I'm only going to use it in a situation where it was be allowed. So how do we look at it? So this is a machlokas in the poskim. Interestingly, it seems that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach has a disagreement with his own son, Rav Shmuel Auerbach. I see that we're a little bit short on time, so I'll just show you briefly that Rav Shlomo Zalman in Shmir Shabbos, Parachav Ha'arachav Tes, in source number 12, he says, a Rova ve'ekdach, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, a rifle and a pistol. Kedei lahatil bahem ema. Why do you hold a rifle and a pistol? So he says the purpose of it really is a deterrent. It's a deterrent to hold a weapon. And that's considered shaber choshev kitzorach gufo. That's considered a tzorach gufo. So in other words, Rav Shlomo Zalman is saying, even if it's considered a kli shemalachto le'isser, what's the reason that I'm carrying it? Not in a pekuach nefesh situation. I'm not in the army. I have an eruv. I still have to get through the problem of muktzah. So he says, well, why you carry a weapon? Let's say not Rabbi Black's situation, 30 people carrying a weapon. Let's say you have 3 people carrying a weapon and it's revealed, there are security guards, whatever it is. Why do you carry it? You're not going to stop, crazy people, but you'll maybe deter someone who's on the line of thinking maybe they're going to attack, maybe they're not. So it's a deterrent. So we know the halacha by muktzah is something that's muktzah is mutter, either tzarach makoma or tzarach gufa. Either you need the place or you need the item itself. Let's say you need to crack a nut. You don't have a nutcracker, you have a hammer. You can take that hammer, it's a kli shemalach l'isser, you're allowed to take it and crack that nut. So what's the tzorech gufa of this weapon? It's instilling fear in people. So that's considered enough of a tzorech. He bases himself on a Yam Yisaschar. I'm not going to get into all the details, but the Yam Yisaschar, I couldn't find it actually, but the Yam Yisaschar, based on a Tosefta and Beitza, writes that you're allowed to move tefillin out of a room in order to allow for tashmish hamita. In order to allow for a couple to have relations, you're allowed to move the tefillin out of the room on Shabbos. How can you move the tefillin? Is it a muktzah? So the answer is that's considered enough of a tzorech to move the tefillin. 1 second, you don't need the tefillin. Here's the thing. You don't need the weapon. The weapon is not being functionally used. Is that enough of a tzorech? Is that considered tzorech ufo? So the Yam Yisaschar, Shlomo Zalman, based on the Yam Yisaschar, based on the Tosefta and Beitza, saying, well, if you can move tefillin out of a room in order to use the room, but you're not using the tefillin, that's considered enough of a tzorech. So this would be considered enough of a tzorech to consider the pistol itself is not being fired, but it's being carried around as a deterrent. His son, Rav Shmuel Auerbach, disagrees with him and says, no, it can't be enough of a tzorech, it's still considered muktzah. It's not really such a nafkamina halacha l'maisa, because halacha l'maisa, like I mentioned before, if it's considered a tzorech gufo in a situation of pikuach nefesh, so you could usually carry it. The only question would be if it's just for deterrent, but it's not really. Is that enough just for the deterrence or not? But it seems to be there's not much of an issue, because most poskim would say you're allowed to move it in a situation where you would need it. The only nafkamina would be if you're allowed to move it, let's say, in a situation where it was left outside and it was going to get ruined. Micham l'tzel, the poskim say you're not allowed to move muktzah. So that would be the only question. If you consider it to be a kli shemalachto le'isser, then you would be able to, you would not be able to move it just for its own protection. But if you consider a kli shemalachto le'heter, like I mentioned, the other svara was it's used for heter. In other words, even to fire it is heter, because a pikuach nefesh situation is when you're going to fire it. So then you would be allowed to move it from Yichamel itself. But it's not such a nafkamina halach l'maisa. I was wondering why it's not considered some muktzah machmas chisar and kiss. Why it's not muktzah, because it's very expensive. You wouldn't have a child handle it. I'm not sure. I was thinking, I didn't find anyone to address this question. If it's muktzah machmas chisar and kiss, it's a lot more chamor, it's a lot more stringent, and therefore maybe there's a problem. I didn't find anyone dealing with that.
Can I ask something which
Yeah.
because maybe suggest one topic for another time, is how is it possible that Shlomo Zalman's son contradicts him? Isn't that an issue of kibbud avim? Should you contradict your parent?
Well, I don't know if he contradicted him in person or if he
What's
just
the difference?
or
How do you do it?
or if he or
I mean, I know it's happening
Yeah.
a lot, but I'm saying,
He's-
how's that work?
I think you're allowed to disagree.
Also, I'll story, you're allowed to.
I hear the question. I don't know. Usually.
That upsets me.
I hear-
It's ridiculous. No, you're wrong.
there are many stories of great Talmidei Chachamim who disagree with their fathers.
Topic, sorry.
I hear the question. I hear I'd have to research it more. I hear the question. Maybe in learning you're allowed to disagree. I don't know.
I would think it's tremendous.
They actually encourage it.
What?
Probably encourage.
I would think it'd be.
It's a nachas.
Nachas.
It's a nachas.
It's encouraged.
Maybe the father gave it.
It has to be done respectfully.
If the father encouraged.
Yeah, it's encouraged. It's encouraged.
Maybe his father encouraged him to find his own derech.
Yeah, it's encouraged.
So let's deal with a different problem briefly because I don't want to keep you too long. The other question, let's say, okay, we've dealt with the Erevin. You have an Erev. We've dealt with Muktzah. Either way you slice it, it's probably not a problem with Muktzah. We have another problem, which is that there's an issue with bringing a weapon into a shul. And that, actually, I was going to quote it before, but it's this past week's Parsha, Parshas Yisro. At the end of the Parsha, we'll see the Mishnah Berurah is going to quote a Rashi, or paraphrase a Rashi from Parshas Yisro. So, extra credit if you don't have to look on the source sheet if you can think of the Rashi. We'll start with the Shulchan. We'll start with the Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us on Daf Pei Beis, Amid Aleph to Amid Beis, it says that by Pinchas, when he went up to take his spear, it says that he had to go and get his spear. It seems to be based on that. The Gemara says, "Mikan she'en nechnasim b'chli zayin lebeis hamedrash." Not getting into all the details here, how we know he's in the Beis HaMedrash, but either way, it seems to be that we understood that he had to go out of the Beis HaMedrash and get his spear because he wasn't allowed to bring the spear into the Beis HaMedrash. And based on this, the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Orach Chaim Kufnin Aleph Siv Vav, Yesh she'osrim li kanes bo b'sakin aruch u'barosh megula. Some aser, some forbid entering with a long knife or a blade that's uncovered into a shul. And this is what the Taz and the Mishnah Berurah they quote, because a sakin or a cherev is mikatzeres, it shortens life, and tefillah is ma'areches yamim. Tefillah expands life, extends life. Now, where does that come from? So it comes from Parshas Yisro. At the end of Parshas Yisro, it says the mizbeach avonim even pasuk chav beis parachav v'mizbach avonim taseli should make for me a stone altar lo sivne esein gazis ki charbecha hey nafta aleh v'atichaleha, that you should not make it out of stone, which would require you to use a tool of a sword, because that would be profanity, it would be profaning. The translation here is a little bit unwieldy, but this is from Safari, I think. For by wielding your tool upon them, you have profaned them. It means that the sword shouldn't be used on a mizbeach. Zakt Rashi from a mechelta halamanata shimhi nafta le bebarzel chilalta. If you put a stone over the altar, it's considered a profanity. Why? Sham mizbeach nivra laharach yamav shel adam. The mizbeach was created to extend the life of a person. V'habarzel nivra lekater yamav shel adam. The stone was the iron that forms the sword is meant to cut people's life short. So therefore, it's inappropriate, according to the Taz, utilizing this mechilta, I think, it's inappropriate to bring a weapon into a shul, because a shul is supposed to be ma'areches yamav, it's supposed to extend our lives. We're davening, we're praying. It's not a place of a weapon, and that's in fact what the Taz is quoting in the Mishnah Berurah as well. However, the Mishnah Berurah and Sifka and Chav Beis quotes from the Eliyah Rabbah, Shedaito she'ein lahachmir ki'im b'sakin megula. The only problem is if you have an uncovered knife. An uncovered knife, that would be an issue. But you can cover it, and that would not be a problem. And in fact, the Tzitz Eliezer of Eliezer Waldenberg, Chelik Yud Simin Yud Ches, he writes that as long as you have it covered, Mikomakim, he writes, Nira, Li Lechadesh, Aliba de Kuliam Velomar, de Zos Mia Beinan Chia Bidome Lahai de Romach Shemach Shalatzma Kefishu Yeh Mukhshar Lakater Yamim. He says, what's the pshat that the covering is a problem? It's because it's not prepared yet to do its job, which is to cut people's life short. What would be an example of a modern day equivalent to a covered sword. If something needs another thing to help it with its purpose, I think kadurim are bullets. If you need, your pistol or your rifle needs ammunition, in other words, it's not loaded, if it's empty, just like the Eliyah Rabbah said, if it's a megula, if it's a sakin megula that it was uncovered, it's a problem, but if it was covered, it would not be. So he wants to argue that if it's not loaded, that would be the same level of not function. It doesn't function yet as a makatzer yamav. It doesn't function yet as something that shortens people's lives. That would be sufficient. Then he gives a little sikum, a little summary at the end. He tells us, first of all, he's, in sakanas nefashos, like we mentioned, you should definitely be prepared. You could carry your gun with you and following your orders. Then he says, Mikol amor nireh lehalacha b'dinon shel asenu. If it's not a very difficult thing, if you don't need it, best not to come into a shul with a rifle or a pistol. And then if you have to, there's no other option. Just don't load it. And then he says it's even better if you can cover it with some sort of beged or a talis. If that's not possible, you have to have it loaded. Load it, but then cover it. And if that's not possible, at least cover it and put it in a holster or something like that. And he says, Yishlahachmir b'shas hatfila gam kishispal bebeso. Because again, it's not about necessarily the shul. It's about be mekater yamav, and tefillah is considered to be ma'arich yamav. It's to extend your life. So therefore, b'shas tefillah, even at home or in the fields, if a soldier is davening, he says b'shas tefillah, best to cover it. If you need it loaded, that's one thing. But put a little bit of, either put it in a holster or put some sort of baggage over it.
Having it, you can extend life because it's going to protect yourself. I don't know, right? They could have done with that.
You're saying self-defense. Self-defense
the
extends life. Okay, but the kli itself. The kli itself is meant to take away someone's life. Sometimes it's necessary. We're not saying these are not necessary things. David HaMelech was necessary for him to kill many people, but he unfortunately was not allowed to build a Beis HaMikdash because he had blood on his hands. It was not because of anything he did wrong, but there are certain impressions that were made upon. Yeah,
a sword and a gun. What about a bat?
A bat is not a weapon. It could be used as a weapon, but I think a bat usually would be considered a sport equipment.
But a knife isn't a weapon either. It's used to cut food.
True. The Taz talks about, I think, if I recall correctly, about the table, the Shabbos table. I think he says you should cover your knife.
For benching.
Yeah, because you're davening. There's a fascinating comment. I believe it's the Ramah, who says before you say Al Naras Bavel, you should for sure cover the knife or take the knife off the table. Because if you don't, you're going to be so depressed. You're going to. It's Uvnei Yerushalayim. I thought it was Al Naras Bavel. Uvnei Yerushalayim. Either way, before benching, you're going to be so depressed because you don't have the Beis HaMikdash. You should take the knives off the table. Yeah, so I hear what you're saying. You're saying if they hold a knife, they said a sakin aruch. So I imagine that sakin aruch is not just a eating knife, a cutlery. It's like a real, sword. So I think anything that's considered sports equipment or some other functionality may not be the same halacha. Just a weapon. So.
Like a police baton.
A police baton has no other function other than to hit people with, right? But it doesn't kill people. I don't think you could kill people with a police baton. I mean, I guess maybe if you hit them a lot.
In the head, yeah.
I think this is specifically a halacha that is codified by what the Shulchan Aruch says. And those things are weapons that really can do a lot of damage by hurting, killing someone. I don't think we should make up addition. It's interesting because the Gemara... it just says romach. That's from Pinchas. So I would think anything of the level of a romach. Just some final thoughts, just as we close. it's a terrible thing we have to talk about this at all, right? We hope that we don't have to put security measures into place like this, or even like we mentioned, it's not lamaisa, but we are thinking about it more than ever before. It's really sad that the default now, we come to a shul and it's locked. I heard this from Rabbi Ari Leibowitz was pointing this out. It's a terrible thing that the default that you go into a shul, it's locked. They can't get in because we have to put certain measures into place because of that. That's a terrible thing. That now we don't have a place to go is the default. You gotta get in during certain times. So that's we look forward to a time when we don't have to put those measures into place, a time of peace, when none of this will be relevant to Mir Hashem. But I thought it was a fascinating sugya to share with you, and
Thank you.
not giving any particular hadracha for what you should or shouldn't do.
Beer now, boys. Beer now.
So have a wonderful day.
Beer now.